The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Henderson mansion, but 12-year-old Emma couldn't see them. She sat at the grand piano in the music room, her small fingers moving gracefully across the keys, playing a melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her heart. The music was her way of painting pictures in a world that had never shown her colors. "Emma, breakfast is ready," called Mrs. Chen, the current nanny, from the doorway. Her voice carried the same tired tone that Emma had grown used to hearing from all the staff members who had come and gone over the past year. Emma's fingers paused on the keys. She could hear the hesitation in Mrs. Chen's voice, the same hesitation she had noticed growing stronger each day. It was the sound of someone who was already planning their departure. "Where's Marcus?" Emma asked, referring to her 10-year-old brother. "He's in his room again," Mrs. Chen replied with a sigh. "He won't come out." Emma nodded and carefully made her way down from the piano bench, her hand trailing along the familiar furniture. She had memorized every inch of this house, every corner and curve, but it still felt cold and empty. The mansion had everything money could buy, but it lacked the one thing Emma craved most: warmth. Down the hallway, Marcus Henderson sat in the corner of his bedroom, his back pressed against the wall. Unlike Emma, who had been born blind, Marcus had lost his sight in a car accident 2 years ago, the same accident that had taken their mother's life. He clutched a worn teddy bear that still smelled faintly of his mother's perfume. The accident had changed everything. Their father, billionaire tech mogul David Henderson, had withdrawn into his work, spending 18 hours a day at his company headquarters. The endless parade of nannies, caregivers, and specialists had begun almost immediately. Each one came with impressive credentials and high hopes, but none had lasted more than a few months. Marcus heard footsteps in the hallway, measured, careful steps that could only belong to Emma. She never stumbled or knocked into things like he did. She moved through their world with a grace that he envied. "Marcus?" Emma's voice was soft as she knocked on his door. "Mrs. Chen made pancakes." "I'm not hungry," Marcus mumbled, though his stomach growled in protest. Emma pushed open the door and made her way to where Marcus sat. She had an uncanny ability to find him, as if she could sense his presence. "She's leaving, isn't she?" Marcus didn't answer, but Emma didn't need him to. They both knew the signs. First came the phone calls to agencies, then the hushed conversations with their father's assistant, and finally, the awkward goodbye where the caregiver would promise to stay in touch but never did. "Maybe the next one will be different," Emma offered, though her voice lacked conviction. "They're all the same," Marcus said bitterly. "They see us as a job, not as people. And when we become too difficult, too much work, they leave." Emma sat down beside her brother, her shoulder touching his. "We're not difficult, Marcus. We're just different." But, even as she said the words, Emma knew that their situation was challenging. Marcus's anger had grown worse since losing his sight. He would throw tantrums, refuse to eat, and lash out at anyone who tried to help him. The doctors said it was his way of processing grief and trauma, but understanding the cause didn't make it easier for the caregivers to handle. Emma, while calmer on the surface, had her own struggles. She experienced night terrors and episodes of deep sadness that seemed to come from nowhere. The child psychologists their father hired spoke about complex grief and adjustment disorders, but their clinical terms did little to comfort a 12-year-old girl who just missed her mother. Downstairs, Mrs. Chen was having a difficult conversation with David Henderson via video call. David's face appeared on the tablet screen, showing a man in his 40s with graying hair and tired eyes. His office was visible behind him, all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the warm kitchen where Mrs. Chen stood. "I'm sorry, Mr. Henderson," Mrs. Chen was saying. "I truly care about Emma and Marcus, but I feel I'm not the right fit for their needs. Marcus's behavioral episodes are becoming more frequent, and Emma requires someone with specialized training in childhood trauma." David rubbed his temples. "What would it take for you to stay?" "I can increase your salary, provide additional support staff." Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. "It's not about money, sir. Your children need more than I can give them. They need someone who understands their unique situation, someone who can connect with them on a deeper level." After Mrs. Chen ended the call, David stared at his computer screen without seeing it. The quarterly reports and merger documents that usually captured his complete attention seemed meaningless. He thought about the conversation he'd had with Dr. Martinez, the children's psychiatrist, just last week. Your children are struggling with profound loss and adjustment challenges, Dr. Martinez had explained. They need consistency, emotional support, and someone who can help them develop independence skills while also addressing their trauma. The constant turnover in caregivers is actually making their situation worse. David knew the doctor was right, but he felt helpless. He had built a technology empire worth billions, had solved complex problems that other companies couldn't even comprehend, but he couldn't figure out how to help his own children heal. The truth was that David was struggling with his own grief. Elizabeth's death had shattered him in ways he hadn't known were possible. Work had become his refuge, the one place where he could still feel competent and in control. At home, surrounded by memories of his wife and faced with his children's pain, he felt like a failure. That evening, Emma and Marcus ate dinner alone in the vast dining room. The chandelier above cast warm light over the mahogany table, but the children sat close together at one end, making the space feel less intimidating. "Do you think Dad will find someone new?" Marcus asked, picking at his mashed potatoes. Emma considered this. "He always does. But maybe this time will be different." "Why would it be different?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. I just have a feeling." What Emma couldn't articulate was the sense of change she felt in the air. It wasn't anything she could point to specifically, but growing up blind had taught her to trust her other senses and instincts. Something was shifting in their world, though she couldn't say what. That night, David sat in his home office, surrounded by profiles from the most exclusive domestic staffing agencies in the country. Each candidate had impressive credentials, advanced degrees in special education, years of experience with visually impaired children, glowing references from previous employers. But, as he read through the files, David felt the same sense of futility that had plagued him for months. These were all capable, professional people, but they were treating his children's care like any other job. They came with structured programs and clinical approaches, but Emma and Marcus weren't just cases to be managed. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed his company's main number. "Mr. Henderson?" It was Janet, his executive assistant. "I'm sorry to bother you at home, but there's been an issue with the building's security system. The cleaning crew can't get into the executive floor." David sighed. "Can't it wait until tomorrow?" "The board presentation is first thing in the morning, sir. The conference room needs to be prepared tonight." 20 minutes later, David found himself back at Henderson Technologies, taking the elevator to the 38th floor. The building was mostly empty except for the cleaning crew and a few programmers working late on deadline projects. As the elevator doors opened, David nearly collided with a woman pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. She was African American, probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Oh. Excuse me, sir," she said, quickly moving the cart aside. "I didn't expect anyone to be coming up." "It's fine," David said, though his tone was distracted. He was already thinking about the presentation materials he needed to review. The woman hesitated for a moment, then spoke again. "You're Mr. Henderson, aren't you? The owner?" David paused and really looked at her for the first time. There was something in her expression, not the nervous deference he was used to from most employees, but a gentle curiosity. "Yes, I am. I'm sorry, I don't think we've met." "I'm Grace Washington," she said with a warm smile. "I've been cleaning your office for about 6 months now. I always wondered if I'd run into you someday." Something about the way she spoke, warm and genuine, made David pause. "Well, it's nice to finally meet you, Grace." "You too, Mr. Henderson. I hope you don't mind me saying, but you look tired." The comment caught David off guard. Most employees were careful to maintain professional boundaries, especially with someone at his level. But Grace's observation came from a place of genuine concern, not presumption.
It's been a challenging time, David admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. Grace nodded thoughtfully.
I heard through the office that you've been having trouble finding help with your children. I know it's not my place, but I have some experience with that sort of thing. David felt something shift inside him, a tiny spark of hope that he tried not to acknowledge. Oh? I raised my sister's 3 boys after she passed, Grace explained. One of them was born with cerebral palsy and had vision problems. It was difficult at first, but children are more resilient than we give them credit for. They just need the right kind of support. As Grace spoke, David found himself really listening for the first time in months. There was something in her voice, a combination of wisdom and compassion that felt different from all the clinical expertise he'd been hearing from professionals. The thing about children who've been through trauma, Grace continued, is that they don't need someone to fix them. They need someone to see them, to understand that their behavior comes from pain, not defiance. David felt his chest tighten. My children have been through more than most adults could handle. I'm sure they have, Grace said gently. And they're probably doing the best they can with what they've got. Sometimes the bravest thing a child can do is keep fighting, even when that fighting looks like acting out. For several minutes, they stood in the empty hallway talking. Grace asked about Emma and Marcus, and David found himself sharing details about their struggles that he'd never discussed with anyone outside of medical professionals. Grace listened without judgment, occasionally offering insights that came from experience rather than textbooks. When David finally headed home that night, he couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. Grace had spoken about his children with an understanding that felt authentic. She hadn't offered quick solutions or promised miraculous changes. Instead, she had simply acknowledged their pain and suggested that healing was possible. Back at the mansion, Emma lay awake in her bed, listening to the sounds of the house. She could hear the grandfather clock in the foyer chiming midnight, the central air system cycling on, and the distant hum of the refrigerator. But there was something else, a feeling of possibility that she couldn't quite explain. In the room next door, Marcus was also awake, staring into the darkness that had become his world. He was thinking about his mother, remembering the way she used to read to him before bed and how safe he had felt in her arms. He missed feeling safe. Neither child knew that their father had just had a conversation that would change everything. They couldn't have imagined that Grace Washington, who had been quietly cleaning their father's office for months, was about to become the most important person in their journey toward healing. But, as Emma finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of music, not the sad melody she usually played, but something hopeful and warm. And, for the first time in months, Marcus fell asleep without crying. Change was coming to the Henderson family, though none of them realized it yet. Grace Washington was about to enter their lives and prove that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from experts or professionals, but from someone who understands that love and patience can overcome even the deepest wounds. The next morning brought chaos to the Henderson household. Mrs. Chin was packing her belongings while trying to manage Emma and Marcus through their morning routine. Emma had woken up from another nightmare, her face streaked with tears, while Marcus refused to get dressed and was having a meltdown in the bathroom. David stood in the kitchen, his coffee growing cold as he listened to the commotion upstairs. He had 3 important meetings scheduled for the day, including a presentation to potential investors, but his mind kept drifting to his conversation with Grace Washington the night before.
Mr. Henderson? Mrs.
Chen appeared in the doorway, looking frazzled.
I've called the agency, and they're sending someone temporary for today. Mrs. Rodriguez should arrive around noon. David nodded absently.
Another temporary caregiver meant another stranger his children would have to adjust to, another person who would eventually leave when the situation became too challenging. Emma won't eat breakfast, Mrs. Chen continued. And Marcus locked himself in the bathroom. I'm not sure what to do. Upstairs, Emma sat at her bedroom window, her head pressed against the cool glass. She couldn't see the garden outside, but she could smell the jasmine blooming and hear the fountain in the courtyard. These sensory details usually brought her comfort, but today they felt distant and muted. She could hear Marcus yelling from the bathroom, his voice raw with frustration. Ever since losing his sight, he struggled with the simplest tasks that he used to do without thinking. Getting dressed, brushing his teeth, even walking through the house, everything required conscious effort and careful navigation.
Marcus?
Emma called out, making her way to the bathroom door.
It's me. Go away. Marcus shouted.
I can't find my toothbrush, and I knocked over the shampoo bottle, and everything is wet and slippery.
Emma could hear the panic in her brother's voice.
These moments of overwhelming frustration came often, usually triggered by something small that reminded him of everything he had lost.
Can I come in? Emma asked gently.
There was silence, then, the sound of the door unlocking. Emma stepped carefully into the bathroom, her bare feet feeling the wet tiles where Marcus had spilled water. I hate this, Marcus whispered, and Emma could tell he was crying.
I hate not being able to see.
I hate falling down and bumping into things. I hate that everyone who takes care of us leaves. Emma found her brother sitting on the bathroom floor and sat down beside him, not caring about the puddles of water. I know, she said simply.
Sometimes I hate it too.
It was rare for Emma to admit her own struggles. She usually tried to be the strong one, the composed sister who helped Marcus through his difficult moments. But, today, she felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her.
Do you think Mom would be disappointed in us? Marcus asked quietly. Emma felt her throat tighten. What do you mean? We're not the same kids we were before. We cry all the time, and we make people want to leave, and Dad works all the time because he doesn't want to be around us. That's not true, Emma said, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Dad loves us. He just doesn't know how to help us. Then, why does he stay away? Emma didn't have an answer for that. She understood that their father was grieving too, but his absence felt like another loss on top of everything else they had endured. Meanwhile, David sat in his office at Henderson Technologies, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. He had made it through his first meeting on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. The presentation had gone well enough, but he couldn't stop thinking about what Grace had said the night before. During a break between meetings, David found himself taking the elevator down to the building's main lobby. He wasn't sure what he was looking for until he spotted Grace pushing a cart of supplies toward the service elevator. Grace, he called out. She turned, surprised to see him. Mr. Henderson. How are your children today? The simple question hit him unexpectedly hard. When was the last time someone had asked about Emma and Marcus with genuine concern rather than professional obligation? They're struggling, David admitted. The current caregiver is leaving today, and I'm not sure what to do next. Grace set down the spray bottle she was holding and gave David her full attention. Have you considered taking some time off to be with them yourself? David almost laughed at the suggestion. I can't. The company needs me, and, honestly, I don't think I'm what they need right now. Every time I look at them, I see Elizabeth, and... He trailed off, realizing he had never voiced that particular truth before. Grace nodded with understanding. Grief is complicated when you're responsible for other people's healing too. But those children need their father, Mr. Henderson. Not a perfect father, just their father. I don't know how to help them, David said quietly. I built this company from nothing. I can solve complex technological problems, but I can't figure out how to comfort my own children when they're hurting. Maybe that's because you're trying to solve them instead of just being with them, Grace suggested gently. Before David could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. The temporary caregiver had arrived early and was already overwhelmed by Marcus's refusal to leave the bathroom and Emma's withdrawal into complete silence. David closed his eyes and made a decision that surprised him. Grace, I know this is presumptuous, but would you consider helping my family? Not as a cleaner, but as someone who might be able to connect with my children. Grace was quiet for a moment. Mr. Henderson, I don't have formal training in special education or child psychology. But you have something else, David said. You have wisdom and genuine care. You understood my children's situation in 5 minutes better than most professionals have in months. Grace considered this carefully.
She thought about her own experiences raising her nephews, about the long nights and difficult days, but also about the joy and growth that came from patient, consistent love. "I'd be willing to meet them," she said finally.
"But I have conditions." David nodded, ready to agree to almost anything.
"If I do this, it's not temporary," Grace said firmly.
"Children need stability, especially children who've been through trauma."
"I won't be another person who leaves when things get difficult."
"Agreed," David said immediately.
"And you need to be involved," Grace continued.
"I can't be a substitute for their father."
"I can support and help, but they need you in their lives." David felt a flutter of panic at this requirement, but he nodded.
"I'll try."
"Not try," Grace said with gentle firmness.
"Commit."
"Your children have had enough people who tried and then gave up."
"You're right," David said. "I commit."
2 hours later, Grace Washington walked through the front doors of the Henderson mansion for the first time as something other than an employee. Mrs. Rodriguez, the temporary caregiver, was sitting in the living room looking defeated while sounds of distress echoed from upstairs.
"What's the situation?" Grace asked Mrs. Rodriguez kindly.
"The boy won't come out of his room, and the girl hasn't spoken since I arrived," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "I tried to give them lunch, but they won't eat."
"I'm not sure what else to do." Grace thanked Mrs.
Rodriguez and sent her home, then stood in the foyer of the mansion, taking in the atmosphere of the house. It was beautiful and grand, but it felt hollow somehow, like a museum rather than a home. She could hear crying from upstairs, not the angry sobbing of a tantrum, but the deep, heartbroken weeping of a child who had reached his limit. Grace followed the sound up the curved staircase, her hand trailing along the polished banister. The crying led her to Marcus's room. The door was closed, but Grace could hear him inside, his voice muffled by what sounded like pillows or blankets.
"Marcus?" Grace called out softly. "My name is Grace. I'm here to help."
The crying stopped abruptly, but Marcus didn't respond. "I know you don't know me," Grace continued, sitting down on the floor outside his door. "And I know you're probably tired of new people coming into your house and making promises they don't keep."
Still silence, but Grace could sense he was listening. "I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere," Grace said. "Even if you're angry with me, even if you have bad days, even if you don't like me at first, I'm going to stay."
There was a long pause, then Marcus's voice came through the door, small and suspicious.
"Everyone says that."
"I know they do," Grace acknowledged.
"But I'm different. Do you want to know why?"
Grace heard movement inside the room, possibly Marcus coming closer to the door. "I helped raise my 3 nephews after my sister died," Grace said. "One of them, Kevin, was about your age when he lost his mom. He was so angry at the world that he barely spoke for 6 months. He used to hide in his closet and throw things when anyone tried to talk to him."
Marcus was definitely listening now.
"But Kevin wasn't bad or broken," Grace continued. "He was hurt and scared and missing his mom. So I didn't try to fix him or change him. I just made sure he knew he was loved and safe, even when he was angry." The door opened slightly, and Grace could see part of Marcus's face peering out. His eyes were red from crying, and his hair was disheveled.
"What happened to Kevin?" Marcus asked quietly.
"He grew up to be a teacher," Grace said with a smile that Marcus couldn't see but could hear in her voice. "He helps other kids who are going through difficult times."
Marcus opened the door a little wider. "Are you going to try to make me feel better?"
"No," Grace said honestly. "I'm going to let you feel however you need to feel, and I'm going to be here while you do it." This answer seemed to surprise Marcus. Every other caregiver had focused on cheering him up or distracting him from his sadness. "I don't want to come downstairs," Marcus said. "That's okay," Grace replied.
"Would it be all right if I came in and sat with you for a while?" After a moment's hesitation, Marcus opened the door fully and stepped aside.
Grace entered the room, noting how it felt lived in and messy in a way that most of the mansion didn't. There were clothes scattered around, books on the floor, and the general disorder of a child's actual living space. "This is a nice room," Grace said, settling onto the floor near where Marcus had been sitting.
"It feels like you." Marcus looked puzzled. "What do you mean?"
"It's real," Grace explained. "Most of this house feels like a picture in a magazine, but this room feels like a place where someone actually lives and thinks and feels things." While Grace was talking with Marcus, Emma had made her way to the top of the stairs. She sat on the landing, listening to the conversation happening in her brother's room. There was something different about this new person's voice. It was warm and patient in a way that felt genuine rather than performed.
Emma had become very good at reading people's voices.
She could tell when someone was frustrated with them but trying to hide it, when someone was nervous about doing a good job, when someone was already mentally planning their departure.
But Grace's voice didn't carry any of those undertones.
After about an hour, Grace emerged from Marcus's room with the boy beside her. He was still sniffling occasionally, but he had agreed to come downstairs and have some lunch.
"Emma?"
Grace called out gently, somehow knowing she was nearby.
"Would you like to join us?"
Emma rose from her position on the stairs and made her way down carefully, her hand on the banister. When she reached the bottom, she found Grace waiting for her.
"Hello, Emma," Grace said. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your father told me you play piano beautifully." Emma didn't respond immediately, but she didn't walk away either.
"I used to play piano when I was younger," Grace continued. "Not very well, but I loved the way it felt to make music."
"Would you show me some of your songs sometime?"
Still no verbal response, but Emma nodded slightly. In the kitchen, Grace found ingredients for grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, simple, comforting food that didn't require negotiation or special requests. As she cooked, she kept up a gentle stream of conversation, not demanding responses but creating space for them.
"Marcus, would you like to help me flip these sandwiches?" Grace asked.
"I could guide your hand so you know when they're ready."
Marcus hesitated, then nodded.
Grace stood behind him, her hands covering his on the spatula, helping him feel for the right moment to turn the sandwich.
"That's perfect," Grace said when the golden brown bread appeared. "You've got good instincts."
Emma sat at the kitchen counter, listening to the sounds of cooking and the easy way Grace included Marcus in the process.
Most caregivers either did everything themselves or became frustrated when Marcus couldn't perform tasks perfectly.
When lunch was ready, Grace sat with the children at the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room. It felt cozier and more natural. "This tastes good," Marcus said, surprising himself by eating without being prompted.
"I'm glad you like it," Grace said. "Cooking is one of my favorite things to do. There's something peaceful about making food for people you care about." Emma took a small bite of her sandwich, then another. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. "Grace?"
Emma said quietly, her first words since Grace had arrived.
"Yes, sweetheart? Are you really going to stay?"
Grace set down her spoon and looked directly at Emma, even though the girl couldn't see her expression.
"Yes, Emma. I'm really going to stay. Even when we're difficult?"
"Especially then," Grace said firmly.
"Because that's when you need someone the most."
For the first time in months, Emma felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope that maybe the next caregiver would work out, but a deeper, more solid feeling that maybe, finally, someone understood what they needed. That afternoon, while the children napped, Grace walked through the mansion, getting a sense of the space and how it functioned. She noticed the formal, untouched quality of most rooms and the way family photos seemed to be hidden away rather than displayed. When David arrived home that evening, he expected to find the usual scene of chaos and stress. Instead, he heard something he hadn't heard in his house for years: laughter. Real, spontaneous laughter coming from the kitchen. He followed the sound and found Grace and his children making cookies together. Flour dusted the counter and floor, Marcus had chocolate on his cheek, and Emma was actually smiling.
"Dad!"
Marcus called out when he heard his father's footsteps.
"Grace is teaching us to make snickerdoodles."
David felt his chest tighten with emotion.
Marcus sounded like a normal, happy 10-year-old boy.
They're very good bakers, Grace said, smiling at David over the children's heads.
Natural talent.
As David watched his children with Grace, he realized that something fundamental had shifted in his house. For the first time since Elizabeth's death, his children looked like children again rather than patients or problems to be managed. That night, Emma played piano for Grace, not the sad, haunting melody she usually favored, but a cheerful song she remembered from before the accident. And, when Marcus had trouble falling asleep, Grace sat beside his bed and told him stories about her nephews and the adventures they had shared. Grace Washington had been in the Henderson house for exactly 1 day, but already the atmosphere was changing. The children were beginning to trust again, to hope again, to believe that maybe they could heal. But the real transformation was just beginning. 3 weeks into Grace's time with the Henderson family, the changes were undeniable but not without challenges. Emma had begun speaking more freely, sharing stories about her dreams and memories of her mother. Marcus still had difficult days, but they were becoming less frequent and less intense. However, the real test of Grace's commitment was about to begin. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning when Emma woke up screaming from a nightmare. Grace rushed to her room to find the 12-year-old girl curled up in a ball, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe.
Mom was in the car again, Emma gasped between sobs. She kept calling for help, but I couldn't see where she was. I couldn't help her because I can't see anything.
Grace gathered Emma into her arms, holding her close while the child shook with grief and fear.
It was just a dream, sweetheart. Your mom isn't in pain anymore. But what if she needed me and I couldn't help because I'm blind? Emma cried. What if I can never help anyone because I can't see? This was deeper than a nightmare. Emma was grappling with guilt and feelings of inadequacy that went to the core of her identity.
Grace knew that how she responded in this moment would either help Emma heal or push her further into despair.
Emma, look at me, Grace said gently, then caught herself.
I'm sorry, listen to me carefully.
Grace took Emma's hands in hers. Can you feel my hands? Emma nodded, still sniffling. Can you hear the sadness in my voice when I talk about difficult things? Yes, Emma whispered. Can you tell when Marcus is upset even before he starts crying? Emma thought about this. Yes, I can. I always know.
That's because you see with more than your eyes, Grace explained. You see with your heart, with your intuition, with all the senses that most people ignore. You help people in ways that have nothing to do with vision. Over the next hour, Grace sat with Emma, talking about the different ways people could help and support each other. She told Emma about her nephew Kevin, who had learning disabilities but became an incredible teacher because he understood struggle. She talked about her own grandmother, who had been deaf but somehow always knew exactly what people needed to hear. Your mother loved you exactly as you are, Grace said finally. She never thought you needed to be different or fixed. And she would be so proud of the caring, thoughtful person you're becoming. Meanwhile, Marcus was facing his own crisis. Dr. Martinez, his psychiatrist, had suggested that he start learning to use a white cane for independent mobility. The idea terrified Marcus, who saw the cane as a symbol of everything he had lost and could never regain. I don't want to use it, Marcus told Grace stubbornly when she brought up the subject after his therapy session. It makes me look helpless. What if we just tried it once, just to see how it feels? Grace suggested. No. Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the house. I don't want to be the blind kid with a stick. I want to be normal. Grace recognized the pain behind his anger. Marcus was still mourning not just his mother but his entire identity as a sighted person. The cane represented accepting a future he didn't want. Marcus, can I tell you about someone I know? Grace asked. Marcus crossed his arms but didn't walk away. I have a friend named James who's a police officer, Grace began. He lost his leg in a car accident when he was 15. At first, he refused to use a prosthetic leg because he thought it meant accepting that he was disabled. Marcus listened despite himself. But, eventually, James realized that the prosthetic wasn't about being disabled, it was about being free, Grace continued.
It gave him the ability to do everything he wanted to do.
He went back to playing basketball, became a police officer, even ran marathons.
That's different, Marcus muttered. How is it different?
Marcus struggled to articulate his feelings.
People can see that he's missing a leg. They know why he needs help.
But I look normal, and then I bump into things or get lost, and people think I'm just clumsy or stupid. Grace felt her heart break a little for this boy who was carrying such heavy burdens. Marcus, using tools that help you navigate the world doesn't make you weak or stupid.
It makes you smart and independent.
The conversation continued for days. Grace never pushed or insisted, but she consistently presented the cane as a tool for freedom rather than a symbol of limitation. She told Marcus stories about successful adults who were blind, from musicians to teachers to business owners. Slowly, Marcus began to consider the possibility. During this time, David was struggling with his own challenges. Keeping his promise to be more involved with his children meant leaving work earlier and being present for family dinners and bedtime routines. His business partners and employees were adjusting to his new schedule with varying degrees of understanding. "Henderson, we need you in the New York meetings next week," his business partner, Richard, said during a conference call.
"The Yamamoto deal won't close without you there."
David looked at his calendar, knowing that next week was when Marcus was supposed to start his mobility training with the cane.
"Can we do it via video conference? This is $100 million deal, David. You can't phone it in."
David felt the familiar pull between his responsibilities as a father and his obligations to his company. For years, work had won every time. But now, looking at the family photo on his desk, one of the few pictures of Elizabeth and the children that he kept visible, he made a different choice. Send Miller and Thompson, Davi.